Good morning, everyone, or evening or afternoon, since most of you watch this as a recording later on, wherever you are, greetings to you. For some of you, we are starting over with this segment, so we're just going to start over because the last 3 days we've had magnificent technical issues that are just the way that these things work. Added to, last night, for years, I've been giving a class on Tuesday nights that runs from 7 to 8:30. It was a live class at the temple, then it's been for 3 years, it's been a class in this house. And for some reason, I decided the class was actually at 6 instead of at 7. At 6 o'clock, consistent with all the confusion that's been going on the last few days, the technical person did not come, of course, at 6. So I changed into my pajamas and sat down to meditate. At 7, there's a knock on the door of my room, and my techie friend is standing there. It's 5 after 7, sort of wondering if I intend to do the class. I point out to him that the class is at 6 o'clock, and he didn't show up. He points out to me that the class is at 7 and has always been at 7. Total blank in my mind. So no surprise that we're still having difficulties. My personal explanation for it is the curse of the mummy, that somewhere in some past life we were unfeeling archaeologists who went in and disturbed something we shouldn't have disturbed. So the curse of the mummy follows me, and it attacks the technical stuff. But I always say to my dear friends who help me with this that the miracle to me is not that occasionally we have problems. The miracle is that it almost always works. So thank you for your patience and understanding. And here we go again. Let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Friend and Guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to understand on ever deeper levels the pathway to happiness, and give us the strength and the determination and the clarity of mind to be able to make the right choices every day, every moment, to keep our hearts and minds focused on your divine presence and not get lost and confused in all the complexities of this world. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om peace. Amen. The part of our class, Chakras, Karma, and Reincarnation, that we're going to talk about today is how chakras and karma really weave together. And that is one of the most important aspects of this whole subject. Many years ago, Swami Kriyananda gave a class at Spiritual Renewal Week, and every day, it was all about the chakras. Those recordings are probably available somewhere, and they're well worth listening to. For me, it was a watershed moment. It was at least 10 years after I came into the community. Swami had taught the subject of chakras. 2 chapters of his iconic Art and Science of Raja Yoga course, 2 of the 14 steps, deal at great depth with the chakras. But somehow it always seemed to me an esoteric subject, and I couldn't figure it out how it practically applied to my life. And I've never been one who enjoys intellectual speculation for the fun of doing it. For some people, it's kind of like it's a living room sport to just speculate about very big topics. And I mean, I can do it, but I'm not motivated to do it. For me, the problem of life has always been happiness and suffering. And every interest that I have in the principles of self-realization and philosophy or spiritual life, everything is about that fundamental, happiness and suffering. I'm very consistent with Yogananda in this. When he wrote, the first book he published was The Science of Religion, and The Science of Religion was about happiness and suffering. That's what karma is, happiness and suffering. So in that class, many years ago, when Swami was speaking of the chakras, I got how this inner magnetism, the inner magnetism which is us, is how energy moves outside of the material world. Because the problem with karma and reincarnation, which everybody has to sort of work their way through, is that we don't remember our past lives. Or let me phrase it differently. We don't recognize that we remember our past lives. Because the details and the facts of them, once one gets really, once one really understands how this process works, you realize that you're remembering your past lives all the time. You just don't call it that. We have inexplicable affinities. We have inexplicable aversions. We have deep-seated expectations. I've had this I call it funny, it's never been funny to me. It's partly explicable because of my Jewish heritage, but I've always expected to be imprisoned in a concentration camp and accumulating material things and so on. It's like I have a disinclination for that anyway, but part of it is because I'm going to lose it all anyway when I go into the concentration camp. And I'm afraid of that. It's not like I'm relaxed about it. It's a fear that I have that I'll be imprisoned. But it also is just so integral to my way of thinking, and I'm like 75 now, and like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was talking to some friends of mine, and I just casually commented, that it's essentially, in as much as we're going to end up in a concentration camp. And they looked at me like I was nuts. I said, don't you expect to end up in a concentration camp? And they both said to me, never. Not once in their life had they considered the possibility that that would happen to them. Now, of course, they weren't Jewish, neither of them. But still, it was like, on a very deep level, it crossed my mind that maybe this wasn't true. And then the funniest conversation I had was with a friend, and I told her about this expectation. We were taking a walk. She started laughing so hard, she sort of fell down onto the pavement. She couldn't even keep walking. She pointed out to me I was over 70 years old. I was living in America. I was a yogi. I was this. That the statistical chances of my being sent to a concentration camp were exceedingly low. And then she pointed out that I wouldn't be imprisoned. I would just be shot. Because why would they waste resources on an old lady like me? And it's like, yeah, that's actually true. I even found a note just in the last few days from Swami Kriyananda, and I said, it was just a conversation, I'd had it on a recording. I said, I've always expected to end up in a concentration camp, and Swami's voice says, I never have. Same thing, it's like, why am I carrying this? And the obvious explanation is, well, been there, done that. Not merely perhaps because of ethnicity or religion, but I think I've been a revolutionary. I think I've been a political activist. I would be the kind of person that would get themselves in a lot of trouble. One of the reasons I have to teach the spiritual life so intensely is because I have a gift of gab, and I have misused it. This is how karma works. Why do I have a lifetime where I never get to stop talking? I just have to keep talking and talking and talking and telling everyone about these teachings, trying to inspire them, not persuade them now, but inspire them to consider that this might be helpful. Well, because I am balancing out the misuse of this same gift, where I led people down roads that, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it was not the deepest level of happiness and suffering. These are just very small examples, and everybody knows, what love at first sight, or many people know what that looks like. I married when I was very young. I was divorced when I was young also, but I met that man. It took 15 minutes. It was 15 minutes later, and it was 5 years. It just where did these things come from? I met Swami Kriyananda. He never spoke in the first 10 seconds. I mean, it would be absurd, except 50 years later it isn't. Where does that come from? We're experiencing our past lives all the time. We just don't know it. Now, this is where the interesting fact of the chakras comes in. And there are many different ways to talk about the chakras, and I've been doing the earth, water, fire, air, ether, super ether. These are powerful images, and I've been talking about the characteristics. And I'm going to just go to another way of doing it, because you can kind of pick the system up from this angle and this angle and this angle, depending on which facet of the diamond you're trying to describe. So I'm going to now talk about how the chakras are the storage bin for our past life experiences, which leads to the karma of each successive incarnation. Now, I believe in the course of this, I've described what the word karma, there's lots of different ways of saying it because it's not an English word. So we've appropriated it, as English marvelously does. It just, when it finds good words, because English-speaking people, and I certainly count myself among them, like to be very precise. Swami Kriyananda, who spoke 8 languages, he could compare the qualities of one language to another. I only speak English. But he commented that English has many, many, many more words than most other languages do. So English is a very good language for philosophy and writing, because you can be so precise. And one of the reasons and ways English does that is historically, when it meets good words in other languages, it just brings them into its language. Karma, chakras, guru, and a few other words like jungle and pajamas, which we don't really think about. These are words that came actually from the East, from India specifically. They were just good words, and now we consider them our words. People think that pizza is quintessential American food. We don't even know that it started from Italy, but now we've made it ours, and on and on. So the word karma, one of the best, most useful definitions, and as I was saying a moment ago, my approach to these esoteric subjects is always, how can I make them useful? How can I wake up in the morning and have this concept be helpful to me during my day? And karma, which is a kind of a mysterious word, it actually simply means an unlearned lesson. And the premise of an unlearned lesson is that there is a consistent, meaningful thread that is the power of our incarnation, that life is not random, and that there is actually a goal, and that we are constantly being propelled from inwardly and pulled outwardly toward the fulfillment of that goal. And the chakras are one of the ways to understand that goal. Now, if we think from the first chakra to the spiritual eye, when we go back to the elements, from earth, water, fire, air, ether, super ether, as I was explaining when I was talking about those, each of those goes from gross, and I don't mean gross in the sense like gross, like slang uses it, but gross like unsubtle. From unsubtle to very subtle. I mean, even the word super ether, what are we even actually talking about? From something that you can pick up and hold in your hand that is solid and immovable. It's just, it's not a subtle form, it's right there. Earth is solid like this. Water is more mutable. Fire is transformative. Air is invisible to the senses. Ether is even more subtle to perceive. So that progression from gross to subtle is also a template for what the progression is from within us when we think of it progressing towards something desirable and expansive. Another way of talking about it is from the most contracted to the most expanded. I mean, the characteristic of Earth is that when the form is set, it can't change. You know, we know from science that everything is energy, but the physical form, the energy has taken the physical form of my body, the energy has taken the physical form of the chair. I can sit on top of the chair. We are both nothing but energy, but I don't fall through the chair because the energy has coalesced into this gross, unchangeable, fixed physical form. But it isn't really the truth on the highest level. It's just the appearance that I'm trapped in. And water, of course, is still identifiable, but as I explained in earlier classes, water is more mutable. It can take the form of. Fire can transform, air can go anywhere, and so on, you see. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase our awareness of what is. Just simple, full stop, of what is. Because if we live on the grossest level, we just think that the material world is what is. And scientists now are dismantling that, but on an everyday practical basis, most people still think that the physical world is a fixed reality. And the fact that Einstein told us that it's all really energy in different forms, we may or may not even know it, but we certainly don't know what to do with it. But what we're doing in our spiritual life is we are progressing from the gross level of the physical world being the real world to the level of super ether, which is the spiritual eye, where we recognize that everything is a manifestation of divine energy. And if all of creation is a manifestation of divine energy, that's a very, very different rule book than if matter were the only reality. I had just this very strange, again, we're probably talking flashback to previous lives because I think that way, I would put it that way. I have no idea what prompted it, but I was sitting in this living room. I was sitting in a different chair, but I was sitting over next to where I am now. And in the house that I live in, there's a staircase that goes up to the second floor that bends slightly, and very efficiently the designer of the house put a closet sort of under that staircase. And so it's a very small room, and you step into it and it curves back, but you can close the door and you can be in there. It would be a perfect child-sized cave. I had this desire, this intense desire to fill that room with gold bullion. Maybe a few diamonds and emeralds, I don't know. I really wanted that room to be filled with gold. And I visualized myself walking in there and shutting the door and being alone with all that gold. But it really came on me. And most people who are on the spiritual path with the intensity that my life has now shown have done a lot in the world in previous incarnations for reasons that, let's go back to the word karma and unlearned lessons. The progression from the first chakra to the spiritual eye, the way we're talking about it now. I want to keep saying this because we don't want to get the idea that the first chakra is evil. It's not evil. And this is what I was saying earlier. It's security. So it either has an upward moving way or a contractive way. But in this context, we're talking about getting into more and more subtle realms. So karma is an unlearned lesson. And if we are going to gradually come to understand that everything we're seeking comes from attunement with the divine presence, and that this world is not, that the fixed matter of this world, thinking of security, is not really going to make us secure. Now, I can tell you that. I can devote every single session for the next 15 years and keep telling you that. But it will mean nothing to you until you yourself actually experience it. So here I am thinking if I could just fill that room with gold bullion and go in there and close the door and have all my wealth, why would I want that? Because it would make me feel safe. This is the concept of the first chakra, seeking security by amassing, by the physical world is the real world. The more I have on the physical plane of what gives me power on the physical plane, the safer I'll be. Until, of course, they take me to the concentration camp and confiscate my gold. And then what difference will it make whether I have it or not? So now, when God does that to us, when life does that to us, when karma does that to us, we tend to think of it like something awful has happened to us. But what's actually happening is our own superconscious self is saying, I have my doubts about this closet full of gold bullion really actually giving you the safety and the happiness that you think you want. So let's experiment, See where your safety and happiness comes from. Let's see how secure this closet full of gold really is. Let's see if it really can make you happy. And of course, then you throw in the factor, which is this material body is a temporary dwelling place. I mean, at the age that I am now, I'm much closer to the end of my life than I am to the beginning of it. My friend Master told us not to identify with our physical bodies, and the older you get, it's so weird because the number really doesn't mean anything to you. And when I was 20, the number I live at now, I thought it would be really different than it feels the way it feels now. There's this wonderful little Reader Digest vignette where some kindergarten children went to visit a convalescent, an old folks home, and one of the little girls was talking to one of the old ladies there, and she asked the old lady, "How old are you?" And the old lady said, 93. And the little girl said, "Did you start at 1?" It's just a perfect picture. We all start at 1, but it feels really different. So anyway, my friend came up with the perfect answer. And you don't say how old you are, you just say what year you were born. Because that's actually a real thing. I was born in 1947. So being born in 1947 carries me through a lot of life experiences that I don't mind remembering, but it doesn't hold me the same way if I say I'm actually 75. This body is 75 years old. Anyway, that's just a fun side. But you see, part of the problem is when we are stuck on the earth chakra concept of reality, we cling to all that stuff and forget that we're going to die. And the thing about dying is, you can't take it with you. I mean, how cliche can you get? Except that's the word. For me personally, I have this memory, and I was about 18 when it happened. And it's one of those things where I feel like I was, quote, awake all night. But I feel like I was awake all night, but it was one of those overnight moments where I tried as hard as I could with, it's all right, just leave it, as hard as I could with all the imagination that I had to try to consider if there was an alternative to dying, and if there was an alternative to the fact that when I died, I would have nothing except my consciousness. I imagined getting on a spaceship, going to outer space, inhabiting another planet. I mean, I just projected myself in every direction that I could think of, and it was absolutely inescapable. There would be a point where the only thing I would have was my inner reality. And it had a huge, it became a huge incentive. I'm not afraid of dying. It wasn't like I was panicked about that. But it seemed to me a very important point to take into account when I was figuring out what I was going to do with my life. And of course, most people don't. They just build up the security here and then have to let it go. And this is the experience that you have. You do that over and over and over again. And that doesn't mean that the life itself wasn't filled with lessons, the good lessons that you learn. But how do you move from the idea that my security is in the external world, except by the fact that you keep finding out that it isn't? This is my going to a concentration camp has actually been a very stimulating thing spiritually. A friend of mine was talking about her grandmother's cut glass punch bowl, and which one of her children or siblings was going to inherit her grandmother's cut glass punch bowl when she died. And you'll have to forgive me, I don't even know if these terms are considered politically incorrect. I'd known this woman for decades, and I said, "You're a WASP," which means a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, if the word is not still used. Like, my best friend is a WASP, which means, how could you possibly keep a glass bowl for all those generations? Didn't they come and get you and put you in the concentration camps? But I saw in her past life experiences, the fact that you would have all these heirlooms was just a natural part of it. In mine, it is a zero, an absolute zero, like this. But, you know, my friend was, and I have to be fair, she didn't get her happiness from having that bowl. It was just part of the story that she had to live. But you see, how do we find out whether these things are meaningful? There are lessons that we have to learn, because what is lastingly real? Who am I? Where does happiness come from? What causes suffering? You know, these are the questions. And karma is the process of answering these questions, answering them on an ever deeper level. Now, what we have to understand, and this is, you know, setting us up for my talking about tomorrow, that once we leave this physical body, all of the things, people, stuff, it's not that it vaporizes, because your children can take your grandmother's cut glass punch bowl and they can save it for their children and their grandchildren. It's not like the universe dissolves when we die, but we move out of this room of the house and we move into another. I mean, Jesus, that's how Jesus put it. But we move out of this plane of consciousness. We move into the astral plane of consciousness, and then our karma, lessons that we haven't yet learned about those 4 important questions, call us magnetically, and I'll speak a little more in the next few days about how this works in the chakras, call us magnetically to the circumstances in which we get to try to find out again. She was an acquaintance, but this woman that I knew, she was from South America. I knew her many decades ago, and at some point, whatever country she was in, it had a big revolution. Her father was a self-made man and was one of the richest men in the country, but when the revolution came, people like them were not welcome, and they managed to escape with nothing. The house they lived in, the revolutionary leader who became the leader of the country, moved into their home, became the presidential palace. I mean, that was the level on which they lived. He lost everything. They were Spanish speaking, came to Mexico. He built it all up again, because it was in him to be able to do it. And then there was a fire. And he lost everything again. And then he came to America, and he didn't do it a third time. He couldn't do it a third time. Too many years had passed, perhaps too much grief, I don't know. But these are the lessons. So then you have to ask yourself, really, is this all there is? Do I just keep trying to do the same thing and expect a different result? Or does this experience actually awaken in me a quest to ask the question a little more deeply? And because there is a transcendent reality, this is what the masters tell us, this is what the whole story is about, that what you think is lastingly real is not. What you think is the source of your security and your happiness is not really your source. And marvelously, they lay out a roadmap. And that roadmap is the progress rising up through the chakras. And starting in our next session, I'll talk about how those energy patterns, this is what I was wanting to say. It's not like the gold bullion and the factory that burned or the house that was taken by revolution. obviously it's not in your chakras, but all of those things are energy patterns that represent a certain vibration of consciousness. And that is the fascinating, subtle aspect of it that we'll deal with in our next session. God bless you.